Hey everyone, Vincenzo Callo here with VCalla Productions. Today I'm sitting here with the MP for Battle River Crowfoot, Damien Kurek. Thanks, Damien, for time. Thanks for having me in your Hill office, and it's great to have you here today.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity and look forward to having this chat with you.
Well, it's great to have you. I don't remember what episode this is. I feel like this is past episode 50. I think it's like 56. So, and it's the first episode in person of Let's Discuss Politics in Top 10. Okay. So it's great to have you here.
I feel honored.
Well, it's so great. And we'll get started now. So the first segment is called Damien's Story. We'll talk a bit about who Damien is and his political history. So first off, can you tell me a bit about yourself, your story, and how you got here, how you got your start in politics?
Yeah, great question. And I think the first thing I would highlight is everybody's story on how they get to Parliament is different. There's 338 people that get elected to the House of Commons every Parliament, and every person's story is just that little bit different. So in terms of my story, I've been involved in politics since, interested in politics from before I can remember, but been involved since I was a teenager, helping knock on doors, put up election signs and that sort of things, attending political conventions, EDA meetings, and just really passionate about the issues that affect my province and our country. And as I went through high school, went to college, and continued to be involved, I saw that one could truly make a difference in our nation. So I had the opportunity to get involved in a little bit more of a formal sense. Went to university, studied politics, did an internship here in Ottawa, and spent some time working in a federal minister's office in 2015, and then became a provincial political staffer for the Wall government in Saskatchewan. Now I'm an Albertan, but at the time the NDP had won the election in Alberta, so I became a political staffer for the Saskatchewan Party, which is basically the Saskatchewan version of the Conservative Party on the provincial level. Worked there for a while, and then came back, moved back home to my home riding actually, and worked for who was my local MP, and then had the opportunity to run in a nomination and then election in 2019. Kind of besides politics, I'm a farmer. My family farms. I'm still involved in my family farm, actually. So if you sometimes catch me in the concert area in Alberta's special areas, you'll sometimes see me driving a tractor, that sort of thing, because I'm still involved in the family farm. So between the issues associated with that, my passion for making sure that rural Canada is not forgotten, whether that be resource development, whether that be agriculture, just the uniqueness of what Canada as a largely rural country is. Even though our population is mostly urban, we have incredible potential in our rural areas, making sure that that is represented. And then as well, and I think we talked about this this last time, I'm passionate about the principles of good governance, making sure that government works for the people. So whether that's ethics, accountability, there's kind of a whole host of things that fit under what I would consider good governance. But so all of those things kind of came together. So when in 2019, I had the opportunity to run in a nomination in my home region, my wife and I sat down and we talked about it and decided that we would give it a go. So then the work began, and a few months later, I won the nomination, and then a few months after that, I was elected to Parliament. And for the last 3.5 or so years, I've had the honor of representing Battle River Crowfoot in our nation's Parliament.
Well, and you kind of answered my next question, which is why you decide to run. But I want to talk a bit about your nomination, because I know that there's this sort of like little joke that goes around, but I guess it's kind of true that winning a nomination for the Conservative Party in Alberta is harder than winning the actual election. Was that your experience? And what was that like, running for nomination in like a hotly contested, I don't know how hotly contested it was, but running for that nomination, what was that like?
Yeah, nominations are certainly different than general elections, and often, and for all the politicos watching, when it comes to nominations, it's the members of a particular political party that decide who that party's candidate will be in the next election. So it is inherently different than a general election where everybody gets a ballot. Because in the case of a nomination, it's only members of a political party. So when my predecessor announced his retirement, I got to work, because I knew that although I grew up in the area, I knew a whole bunch of the people and had been in the communities. It's a large rural riding with more than 60 different towns, villages, and one small city. So I knew that if I was going to earn the trust of that pretty diverse region, large region, I had to demonstrate that I could work. And so I got to work. I took an unpaid leave of absence from my job. I was a political staffer, so I took an unpaid leave of absence from there and simply got to work. So I sold memberships. And when I had sold memberships to all my friends and all my family members and everybody else I could think of, I started knocking on doors and saying, hey, you have a chance to decide who the next Conservative Party candidate. And part of the pitch, whether you explained it or not, was to say, look, this is a pretty conservative region. You never take anything for granted, but history demonstrates that it's been conservative and it will probably be again. So make sure to buy that political party membership and have your say in this first step of the process. So when it comes to the actual nomination, there was a number of people that I ran against. We had a really cordial nomination campaign where we talked a lot about the issues, but my focus throughout the entirety of that about 3.5 month timeline was to connect as many people with the Conservative Party as possible and make sure that they knew that I was their best option to be a strong candidate and ultimately a strong member of Parliament. So it is certainly the battle, because there's some people that probably think, well, if you could just win the nomination, then you get an easy path. Well, I showed that I could work hard in the nomination because I wanted people to know that I would continue working hard in the election that followed soon after the nomination and continue to work hard in Parliament. And for me, it was like an extended job interview. So it's certainly, and I've had the honor of now being elected twice, and in one of the most conservative areas of the country that's been by pretty good margins. But I take that as a tremendous responsibility for those individuals that came out to first support me in my nomination. I need to keep working for them through every step of the process. So it's really like that job interview process. It just takes a little bit longer than maybe what would be the case in tighter ridings where you're not quite sure what the result will be, because it's really, you get to know a lot of these people, right?
Well, and it's interesting that you say that it's like a job interview, because I have a whole series called the Political Job Interview. Viewers of my channel will know, and in the last municipal election here in Ottawa, it went very well, and it really is like that, selling yourself to the people, showing them that you would be their best candidate, and it's so important. But we'll go on to the next segment now. So this segment's called Serving as an Elected Official, where we'll talk a bit about Damien's experiences and achievements as an MP over the past years that he's been an MP. So what is your favorite part about serving Battle River Crowfoot as their MP? Let's talk local first. What's your favorite part there?
Well, I'm glad you differentiated, because often I answer that in two ways. There's the local representative side of things, and then there's the Ottawa legislative side. And although they're closely connected, they are different. So when it comes to the local issue, there's a whole host of things that have been real that I could point to. But one of the things that really stands out for me was after a Remembrance Day service, and this was during COVID. Most of my time serving has been during the dynamics of COVID, and I know when we did our earlier interview, it was virtual because the dynamics were very different. But as a local MP, being able to stay connected with the people that you have the honor and responsibility of representing. So one of those moments was when, after a Remembrance Day service, I and very few people were allowed in the room. I think there was a space limitation, so it was kind of just a different feel, not necessarily what one would be used to. But I went after to the local Legion, and a very casual environment, and just had the opportunity to sit down and chat with some of the veterans and hear some of their stories. Wasn't political, wasn't I wasn't campaigning or anything like that, but just being their representative and hearing their stories. And there's a lot of things that happen in an MP's day, whether that be fighting for constituents on an individual level on things like casework, or the big picture issues like opposing the carbon tax and things like that. There's a whole host of things, but it comes down ultimately to the people. And when I left, after I spent an hour or two or whatever it was at that local Legion, I got home and my wife asked me, she said, how did it go? And I remember looking at her and I said, it's for things like today, for reasons like today, that I got elected. Hearing those stories, being able to represent those people and their experiences to make sure that their voices are heard in Parliament. So on the local level, there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes to mind, but really just serving the people and making sure that their voices are heard in our nation's Parliament.
Well, and that's so important. It's a big part of your job. It is the biggest part of your job, serving those people. And let's shift our focus now to this place, to Ottawa, where you've been serving as an MP since 2019. And I wanted to ask you what your favorite achievement as an MP has been over these years since you were first elected.
Yeah, so I think there's again a couple of things that I would point to. Fighting to see Parliament restored after it was shut down because of COVID. To me, democracy was an essential service and should be considered as such. And I was really disappointed that there seemed to be an attitude by the government that they didn't care for the preservation of those core principles over the course of especially the early months of the pandemic, when we had done that well as a country during wartime and past pandemics. So being able to be one of those who fought really hard to see a restoration of Parliament so that we could continue doing the work of representing the people was really something that I am very, very proud of. And then there's I would point to a lot of the work that I've been able to do on committee, making sure that part of the legislative process and the value, both connecting it with local issues, whether that's getting constituents to come and testify before committees here in the capital, or just making sure that those common sense voices of the people that I represent are heard around the committee table and how that affects things like legislation and whatnot. And then some of the higher profile stuff, like being on the ethics committee during the We Charity scandal debate and making sure that working hard to restore some of that trust that is required for people to be able to not just trust a political party who's in government, but the essence of our institutions and the risk of eroding trust in that. So that's it's a little bit of a long-winded response, but just being able to make sure that again, ultimately the people that I'm representing get their voices heard in our institutions, and the fact that our institutions are designed to ensure that those voices can be heard. Sometimes that's missed out on by those in our who come here. They kind of become stuck in the Ottawa bubble. It's frustrating when that happens, because Ottawa is not meant to be a bubble. It's meant to be a place where a diversity of opinions, voices, and people come together to have discourse and dialogue and then chart a path forward. Sometimes you'll agree with the path forward, sometimes not. But to have that discourse in the process is so fundamental, and I'm proud, and I think that's when it comes to like pointing to an achievement, being able to be a part of that is truly something that is an honor and something that is exciting to be able to continue in that.
So we're going to go into our last segment now, which is called The World of Politics Around Us, where we'll talk a bit about this world of politics that surrounds us. So first off, Damien, I want to ask you, who is or who was another politician or some politicians that inspire you as an MP?
Yeah, so there's a whole host of them, but I'll start with a historical figure, and then I'll give you a more contemporary one. Winston Churchill, and although many people would point to him as being one of the greatest leaders of the last century, and I would agree with that observation. Part of the reason why he's so inspiring is because you have this complex personality. Magnanimous yet humble. You have somebody who was just represented so many different things, yet also made mistakes, but was one of the few political figures that owned up to those mistakes, and in some cases even changed course. So throughout his life and his time, both in leadership and in some cases when he was out of leadership, he demonstrated a statesman-like attitude that I think is something that is very, very inspiring. And in terms of, if you ever have a chance, read some of his books. A prolific writer.
I have the set.
Okay,
I have
good,
the set,
good.
the Second World War set.
Oh, it is incredible. to from his voice, and then I've read biographies and whatnot as well, and just to see the complexity of a man who dedicated most of his life to public service, when there would have been easier paths for the descendant of an aristocrat, right? But became a champion for regular people and for causes that at some points in time were not very popular. When he was one of the few voices that was standing up against the growing threat of Nazi Germany and different things like that. Anyways, we can talk a lot about that in terms of history, but
I'm a history student. I know.
so that's you know well some of
exactly.
the stories. Right? A more contemporary person who inspires me is my predecessor. I had the chance to volunteer on his board, Kevin Sorensen. He served Battle River Crowfoot, and then Battle River Crowfoot. The constituency changed a bit there in the middle of his term, but he spent about 20 years in Parliament, and a farmer, and somebody who maintained his principles, and who he was through his time in Parliament, was able to serve in various capacities, including as a cabinet minister, chair of a committee, and make a real difference in both the region and our nation's capital, but also was humble and respectful. And although representing one of the most conservative areas of the country and winning by large margins throughout his entire time in politics, he never forgot who he worked for. And yet at the same time, and I remember, because I worked for him for a while as well, I came out of a meeting, and happened to be a meeting with somebody that they were on totally opposite ends of a political issue. Did not vote for him, lived in the constituency, but were not fans politically. And the comment that was made as that individual was leaving Kevin's office was, I may not vote for you, but it'll be tough to vote against you. Now, Kevin didn't compromise his values one bit. Didn't say something to try and make this particular constituent happy that he wouldn't have said to anybody else who supported or didn't support him. But that ability to just be honest and engage, and to find that path forward where you maintain your principles while still being respectful, is something that is really inspiring. So yeah, so in terms of the contemporary, and Kevin is still involved. He's not in elected office now, but doing a number of things in farming still, and in the Killam area. And then in terms of history, Winston Churchill is an awe-inspiring figure in so many ways. So,
well, definitely. And now I want to go on to the last question, which is one about the future. And I want to ask you what you think an issue is that needs to be focused on more, that you would like to see focused on more, you'd like to see your party focus on more, something that should be worked on.
Yeah, great question. And I think there's a whole bunch of issues, but one of the things that I think kind of overall that this comes back to the need for good governance, and just the overall perspective, and I think what is required for democracies to be maintained and to thrive, and that's the ability to have discourse and acknowledge that it's okay to disagree, that you can have a debate, that you can have and sometimes a passionate debate. But just because somebody disagrees with you doesn't mean that they can't respect you, doesn't mean that you can't work together. I find it really unfortunate that sometimes in our political discourse, and I see this increasingly with this, a lot of people would refer to it as, polarization or different things like that. But it's not even just about where on the political spectrum people are. It's about the attitude in which you approach anybody who has a different opinion. I respect very much that not everybody is going to agree with me. In fact, if you were to poll every person in every room of everyone who's watching this episode, you would see differences of opinion. Just because there's differences of opinion doesn't mean that you create mortal enemies. Now, there are principles and whatnot that you have to be able to stand firm on that may cause some dissension or disagreement, and that's all fair and fine. But to be able to have debate and discourse is something that needs to be allowed to happen, needs to be able to have, and not just be accused of the lowest common denominator. If somebody disagrees with you, then you accuse them of being the worst possible thing imaginable. That's bad for democracy, and democracy only can thrive when you can have real discussions, regardless of one's political stripes. And I think if, as a society, we need to be really careful that if we allow that to continue down the path where anybody who disagrees with you is somehow a bad person, then you fundamentally disrupt the very essence of what democracy was supposed to be, and it ends up being incredibly damaging for our ability to function. So that's kind of it's not necessarily just a political issue. There's a whole host of political issues, and I can tell you, I hear a lot from my constituents about a host of the frustrations with the Trudeau Liberals and the direction of things. And there's a provincial election that's going on in Alberta right now, so we're hearing a lot of those issues as well. But let's have the discussion, let's have the debate, and let's put the ideas out there so that we can meaningfully engage on those subjects that matter to Canadians. And just because somebody disagrees with me or with you doesn't mean that they shouldn't be valued.
And that's such an important topic, and I'm glad we're ending on that today, because that's something that I've been trying to do. Reach out, show, and we're going to see this in top 10, that politicians are human too.
Yeah.
Everybody is human, and we need to do better, because this political scene right now, there's a lot of toxicity, there's a lot of going against each other, especially in the social media age. Yeah. There's a lot of hate, and if we can overcome that and just work together and hear each other out, it'll be so much more important. But I think that's a great way to end today.
Thank you, Vincenzo. And just to say too, partisanship is not a bad thing, but it's a little bit like if you're playing a sport, and probably most people have played sports at some point, right? You can be passionate on the field, but it doesn't mean that you hate your opponent, right? You still shake their hand at the end. You still may, do other things with your opponent. So being partisan is not necessarily a bad thing.
Of course not.
But also, if we allow that to distract from the humanity of those who may be our political opponents, that's when things start to deteriorate. And I've seen how toxic that can be in our nation's capital. To just focus on making sure that we find that right balance and then respect people.
So that's all I have for today. Thanks, Damien, so much for joining me. It was great to have you here on Let's Discuss Politics.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity, and thanks everybody for tuning in. And it's important to keep that dialogue going like we talked about. So whether that means you run for office one day or just ensure that you're talking about the important issues, I appreciate your role in that. So.
Well, thank you. And if you like this interview, make sure to go check out our other discussion here on YouTube for Top 10. If you're watching this at the date of the premiere, it's going to be coming out on Friday. So Let's Discuss Politics is a VCalla production. Until the next video, I'm Vincenzo Calla, signing out.